Okay. Well, let's start out with a little bit of review, a little bit of practice, I should say. Let's do some rhythm stuff. Now, what we're going to do, and what I'm hoping you'll do alongside me, and there's no way for me to verify this, is if I say one particular rhythm, I want you to say the other rhythm, okay? This is something that's very easy to enforce in class because I can hear 2 streams or 3 streams of individuals in a live setting. But anyway, I'm gonna play a rhythm. It's gonna be a relatively simple one to start with. And if you'd like, you could go along with the rhythm I'm saying, but I'd encourage you to actually say the rhythm that I'm not saying. Okay? So I'll say the bottom line and you say the top line simultaneously. All right? 1, 2, ready, go. Ta, 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 rest, rest. Ta, 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 ta. Okay. Grab my microphone and let's try a different one. Okay. Now you should be able to hear me through my microphone, or this other microphone, I should say. Let us do this one, okay? This one's a little bit trickier. There's a couple of things to keep in mind. One of the things to keep in mind is this repeat sign, which encourages you, well, just doesn't just encourage you, but actually requires that you repeat each passage. When you don't see a repeat sign on the other side, that means that you repeat everything from the beginning. But in this case, you see a repeat sign, you see these 2 colons here, and you see these colons here. That indicates that you sing this passage and you repeat this passage, okay? By the way, there is a symbol here that you may or may not be familiar with. This right here is, I guess I can show you on the OneNote. This right here is the it's important to recognize the difference between this and this, okay? In fact, I'll make a little slide on this. New page. Half versus whole versus bar rests, okay? Actually, there's actually 3 distinctions here, okay? So I'll open Sibelius. Hopefully sound will emanate. Create a new one. Okay. Okay. Probably can't hear that. Let me change my settings. I can't hear this either. Play setup. Okay, I've got it. Gotta restart the software. It's a little bit tedious. There's a certain order of operations with this software, because this notation software will actually latch onto another software and causing the audio engine of this software to control the audio for this software, but I don't always want that behavior. And then Zoom just makes it even more complicated. But I've learned to take it all in stride. Let's see. Okay, great. You should be able to hear that, I think. Correct? Okay, awesome. So here's a little bit of a confusing thing. there's this idea, if let's say we're in 4/4, let's actually start by, let's start with 4/4, okay? We have four measures, let's say we have 4 notes, and then we have a measure of rest, okay? Okay, so make this a little bit smaller. So let's say that this is the whole rest scenario. Okay. Now, right here, you could see that this right here is a whole rest because it has four beats. Okay. You can clearly see that, right? We'll come back to this one, actually. This could also be called a bar rest for reasons we'll talk about in a moment. But let's look at a 2/4 example now. Okay. Now let's take a look at this. Okay, this is the confusing thing. Okay. Actually, let me come back to the 4/4 example. Okay, so let me save this really quickly. Whole rest versus half rest versus bar rest. Okay, so now let's look at this example. Right here, you actually see what they call a half rest, which is a 2-beat rest. Okay. One way that you can quickly differentiate a whole from a half rest is that a whole rest is hanging, and a half rest kind of looks like a hat. It kind of looks like you've set a hat on this staff line, and the hat, the sort of phrase of the hat are sort of blending in to the staff line itself, right? So a half rest, it looks like a hat. Whole rest is hanging, right? So this is a 2-beat rest. But let's take a look at this scenario, okay? Let's look at this scenario. Now here, the time signature is in 2/4, right? Yet the rest looks like a whole rest, right? It basically looks as though it's 4 beats of rest, correct? Like, that's a little confusing, right? How could you possibly have 4 beats of rest in a measure that only has 2 beats? Well, the default convention is you represent, if the entire measure is taken up with rest, you basically use this symbol. And this just means a bar rest. Takes up whole measure of rest. Okay, so for instance, this right here is a bar rest because it actually isn't, well, it's for 2 reasons. One reason is that it's taking up the entire measure of rest. And in a way you can tell that it's not a whole rest is because it's not 4 beats, right? So going back to this top scenario, this is both a whole rest and a bar rest, right? So this first scenario is actually both a whole rest and a bar rest, if that makes sense. So it's a little bit confusing, right? But this is just the way it is. So for instance, put this on the one note. here. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So when we're looking at this particular example here, well, here, in this particular case, this is hanging upside down, right? But it's also the case that we're in a time signature of 4/4. So if the rest symbol is hanging upside down, it's known to be a whole rest or a bar rest, and it actually is both in this particular situation, right? So if you find measures of 2/4, I think you'll find this more often. It's like my notation software. Let's take a look. Let's take a look at another example, just to make sure that I'm curious what my notation software will do when I make a measure of 8/4. It actually uses. It's funny. It ranges in terms of what it does. So if I make it a measure of 5/4, it actually treats this as a bar rest, right? But if I make this a measure of 8/4, it actually treats this rest as like what they call a double bar rest, which is something that I don't see very often. I wonder what will happen if I make this measure 16/4, which is 16 beats. It goes back to a regular bar rest. It's really a convention thing. Like in basically any time no matter what time signature you have, you can convey the measure of rest as being just this symbol for simplicity. Because if you had 16 beats of 16-beat measure, a musician quickly at a glance to know that the measure is empty doesn't need to see 4 whole rests. Like they can just see one particular bar rest. With that being said, you might actually make, in complicated scenarios, there's an argument to insert a bunch of bar rests. I mean, a whole rest instead of a bar rest, because then the person can also identify the number of beats in the rest. Right here, you can't really identify the number of beats in a bar rest without looking at the time signature, right? But you could actually split it up into whole rests and whatever other type of rests you want in order to allow the user to quickly identify how many rests there are without having to reference the time signature, and which might help them stay on track. So there's no like right or wrong way of doing it, but just be aware that when you see this, it's a whole rest. You have to be careful because it depends on the context whether or not it's 4 beats or greater. I guess or less. It depends on the context of how long it'll be of the time signature. So something to keep in mind. Okay, so let me do this exercise. I will rhythmically produce the bottom exercise, and you go ahead and complement me with the top exercise. So this right here is a pickup beat. So what I'll do is I'll say this. I'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, very good. One sec. Okay.
Professor?
Yeah.
On the last bar of the rhythm we just did, why is there only 3.5 beats?
It's a great question. In order to answer that question, I guess oftentimes a composer, when they have a measure of pickup at the very beginning, they complement the final measure against the beginning measure. This doesn't always happen, but in this case, it does. So for instance, if you add up the pickup, it's like you're borrowing time, and then you don't actually get extra time. You complement it from here. So this eighth note adds up to, when you add the eighth note from here to the final measure, you get 4 beats. Truth be told, I never do this. Like, I often have pickup measures, but my software doesn't keep track of this. And it's not like, if I have like a 6-minute song, it's not like my, it's not like an individual will be keeping tabs on that, and they'll say, wait a second, I used up an extra beat here. I'm in a beat deficit. That doesn't happen. But I don't know why they insist on doing it here, but they do. I guess it kind of shows you the complementary relationship. To be honest, it's not, this never really made so much sense to me, because like, it's not like you can't have something on the last beat either. It's so
Thank you.
yeah, of course. Okay. All right. Okay, let's do this one. Okay. 1, and they do the same thing here. So it's a time signature of 4/4, and the last measure has 3 quarter note beats, and then there are 2 eighth notes that additively construct the final measure. So let's see. 1, 2, 3. Hear the sledges with the bells, silver bells. 3, 4. What a world of merriment their melody foretells. How they tinkle, tinkle, tinkle. Oh, by the way, let me say something really quickly. I'm sorry. These commas right here are indicators for where to breathe. Okay? So at a crude glance, take a note of where you should breathe. You're supposed to breathe right here. You're supposed to breathe right here. Of course, you could breathe over here. You could breathe here and here. There are situations where you want to breathe together. And there are situations, if you have a really, really long note, well, I guess I should say this. In these situations, you want to breathe where there's rests and logical places where the sentences end, because those are natural places where you should breathe. If by chance you run out of breath midway, it's okay to take a quick catch breath somewhere in the middle. And but realize rests are a very logical place to take a breath. Like no need to hold your breath here, right? Let's try this again. 1, 2, 3. Hear the sledges with the bells. 4. Silver bells. 3, 4. What a world of merriment their melody foretells. How they tinkle, tinkle, tinkle in the icy air of night, while the stars that oversprinkle all the heavens. Might be going a little too fast. Let me slow down. Stars that oversprinkle all the heavens too. Seem, I made a mistake. Heavens too. Seem to twinkle with a crystalline delight. 2, 3. Keeping time, time, time in a sort of runic rhyme to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells from the bells, 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 from the jingling and the tinkling of the bells. 2, 3. Now, truth be told, you might be struggling with this. Don't be discouraged, because this is actually much easier to do when you have a room full of people singing alongside you. It almost becomes an unconscious thing. There's 2 kind of things that are difficult here. One of the things is just kind of saying the words. Just reading words is like is difficult, because it's like, the act of like following along with a teleprompter is a difficult activity. Additionally, keeping rhythm is a difficult activity. So when you have a group, a choir, for instance, you kind of unconsciously latch on to one aspect of these things or both aspects of these things based on what your colleagues are doing. So right now I'm your only colleague, so maybe that's less reinforcement than you'd like, but hopefully that's giving you a little bit of context for this stuff. Okay. So dotted quarters and tied eighths. So I'm pretty sure you've studied dotted notes. I know we've talked about them, but it's just to recap, a dotted note is just basically taking the value of the note and adding 1/2 of the value of the written note to the duration of the note. So if this right here, this quarter note without the dot is worth 2 eighth notes, adding a dot will add an additional eighth note because 1/2 of 2 is 1. So 2 plus 1 is 3 eighth notes, right? So what we have here, let's try this exercise. Now notice we're in 3/4, but what do you see here? What kind of rest is this? Of the 3 that we talked about today.
Bar?
A bar rest, absolutely. Okay, so it's a bar rest. So let's try this out. And remember the repeat here. We're gonna go back, okay? And then we have 3 beats unrepeated, and then we go on here and we repeat these 2 measures. 3 beats unrepeated, 2 measures repeated, 3 beats unrepeated, 3 beats, 2 measures repeated. Okay. Ready, set, go. 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, and 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, and 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, and 3, 1, whoops, I messed up. 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, 3, 1 and 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1 and 2 and 3, 1, 2, and 3. Okay? So okay. These ones might have thrown you off. This right here is syncopation, okay? Syncopation is tricky from the what basically syncopation is when you have a beat, when you have a rhythmic event that starts on an offbeat and is held through the length of a big beat. So for instance, let me show you an example of this. I think I have an example already made. Okay? So it goes against the regular pulse, the big beats, right? So the pulse is here, right? There's in a measure of 4/4, you have these 4 arrows represent the 4 big beats that you'd expect, the 4 big beat positions that exist in the measure, right? Now syncopation plays off this. I mean, it goes off this. I should say it in a way that it's not reinforcing these 4 beats, it's kind of contrasting these 4 beats. So look at this entry right here. This particular beat enters right here between these 2 big beats and is held, it's sustained through the note. And it continues on through the note. And then it starts on an offbeat. The event starts on an offbeat meaning it doesn't start on one of the big beats. It starts on an offbeat. It's held throughout the length of a big beat. It doesn't have to be, but it basically, syncopation means that the note event begin on an offbeat. The note events begin on an offbeat, okay? That constitutes syncopation, okay? So you can see how this is a measure chock full of syncopation because there are many offbeats. Like you can have one example of syncopation here where it's just one, only syncopated beat is this beat right here, right? Because it occurs on an offbeat. Because if you're counting a pulse, da, 2, 3, you're counting the pulse of the time signature, it feels syncopated, right? If you're subdividing even further, it doesn't feel syncopated. Let's say you're counting to 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then this would feel like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Every single one of those beats kind of lines up with a beat, right? Every single beat is an on beat in that context, right? Because I'm articulating every single, let me give you an example. Okay, you might wonder you might wonder about syncopation in this manner. So let me show you what I mean. Okay, so that particular measure was like this. In fact, I'll copy the notes. Well, no, there's no pitches, of course. So that particular measure looked like this, right? Whoops, 1 second. Dot. Right, so you had this particular measure. Okay, so this is type A. This is one way of representing it. What if you also, alternatively, represented it like this? What if you did this? In fact, I think I have a shortcut for this. What if you represented it like this? In this particular case, this is double the length, right? So this is double the duration. And this is still 3/4, right? It'll become clearer what I'm talking about in a moment. So right here, it's 1 and 2 and 3, right? And then there's an invisible beat 2, right here. And you can see that it's not actually, this event is happening on an offbeat. Whereas here, this is the same thing. Right? So let's say you have, just as a thought experiment, let's say you have this particular passage at 160, and then you have this particular passage. Let's say at 100, and let's say you have this particular quarter note passage at 200. This is like the paradox of syncopation, or one of the confusing perceptual difficulties of syncopation. I'm going to play both of these measures back to back, and they're going to sound exactly the same. But I'm going to argue that this measure feels more syncopated than this measure just based on the way it's written, okay? Right? They sounded the same. Let's listen to it again. Right? I can turn off the metronome so you can kind of hear it without the additional clicking and clacking. In fact, I'll also insert a handy dandy repeat sign. And repeat. Right? But in this particular case, it's syncopated in the way that I've written it, right? Because you're counting in 3, and there's things that are occurring on the offbeat. So you go 1, 2, 1 and 3, 1 and 2 and 3. The events feel like they're happening on the offbeat, right? But here in this situation, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It depends on the context. So like in music like this, I guess both of them have a syncopated feel, but to some degree. But this one is written in a way where it feels the pulse that you're feeling. Like I guess the context of the events matters. So if I insert another measure here. Let's say I insert another measure here. I guess in this example, you'd probably expect the music to be like this. Something like this, right? You'd expect the music, around this to be something organized in threes, right?
Professor?
Oh yeah.
So in chat, it's saying like, so I thought it seems like these are very equivalent. Are they not equivalent?
Yeah, you know, as I'm doing this, I'm starting to realize I'm trying to make the argument that they're not equivalent, but as I'm constructing this, I'm finding more similarities of how they're equivalent than how they're different. I'm finding many similarities for how they're equivalent, but they are equivalent. But there is a reason why it's not equivalent. The reason it's not equivalent from a syncopation standpoint, at least from the way that it's considered in terms of the beats, in terms of how let me actually, I might be going on a rabbit hole here, but let me actually, this will either prove or disprove what I'm trying to say. Give me 1 second. In this particular case, I guess like based on the way you're organizing the beats, you can see that these events happen on offbeats, right? In this particular case, let's say the tempo is slower. This is where they are different, okay? Because this actually feels much slower. In this particular case, you have to accomplish these particular events quicker, right? So this feels syncopated. If you had more time to process these events and they were spaced out more, it would be less syncopated because these events actually happen on beats, right? These actually are the big beats of the measure. Whereas here, these events happen on off beats because you're counting in 3 and then these are happening on off beats. Like this is happening on the and of 1, this is happening on the and of 2. Whereas here, this is the same exact passage as above, but it's durationally stretched. So it's taking twice as long to accomplish the same passage as the measure above, right? But anyway, it's a little bit of a moot point. You could argue that this is also syncopation because you're expecting something to happen on beat 1 of this measure, and yet something happens on beat 2. So I guess it's kind of a sensation of, syncopation is basically a sensation of playing around with the pulse where you're obfuscating big beats, whether or not you obfuscate the big beats of the measure or the downbeat of the measure. In this particular case, even though I was trying to make the case that this is different just based on the way I've written it, in some ways this is still syncopation because I'm obfuscating. Obfuscating means I'm kind of confusing the relationship of the fact that there's a beat that normally happens at the beginning of every measure, or there's an event that often happens at the beginning of every measure, right? Syncopation obfuscates or confuses the feeling of the big beats. So here, I'm obfuscating the idea that something happens on beat 2 by placing something on the and of beat 1. Visually speaking, it's not as clear that I'm obfuscating something here in the way I've written it here, because something does happen on beat 2, right? But in fact, I am kind of obfuscating the beats here because I'm obfuscating the feeling of something happening on beat 1, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. This might be more conceptually and theoretically salient than practically salient, but I guess something to keep in mind. Let's see. Syncopation equivalence. I'm just gonna save this just in case I ever need it again. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I haven't confused you more than I didn't. But anyway, let's look at some practical examples. So right here you have 1, 2, 3, 4 beats in this measure, and you can see that a lot of the events in the measure below it actually are playing off this relationship, I shouldn't say, are playing against this relationship, right? It's obfuscating this feeling of 4 beats in the measure by introducing events that are contrary to the feeling of these 4 beats. Okay, let me look in the chat really quickly. Hopefully I can. Oh, 1 second. Oh, Miguel is here. There's a slight problem in the first example. Oh, right.
Nakul, sorry for interrupting. So I think the last and of the first measure, it's the next one. Yeah, I think the 3 and the in the first measure, the 3 and the and are switched.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you for
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Don't worry.
Yeah, this is good. Yeah, very good. Thanks for catching that. So perfect. All right, man. If I didn't make this confusing enough, so hopefully you're not totally confused. Right, it's missing the and of 2. Did I do everything right? Sorry. Okay.
It's missing the, so like the dotted quarter is, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a less, okay, yeah, that is true. That's a less significant beat, but it is indeed the case, right? So this is another event that is occurring, but I would argue that this one right here, I'm going to bolden it because it's more significant. Because like as you're traversing this measure, you're kind of tracking along these bigger beats. You're tracking, like the bigger beats are given by the numerator of the time signature. So the idea is you're feeling these big beats, like I'll even bold this one, right? So right here, okay, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1 and 2 and 3, 1 and 2 and 3. So it helps to kind of prioritize these bigger beats, but feel the smaller beats as well. It always helps to subdivide and to experience smaller units of time. Yes, it often helps. It's helpful to put them in brackets when you have beats that are syncopated, right? Brackets like this, or parentheses even. Let's do that. So 1, 2, and 3 and, right? So anyway, let's take a look at this particular example right here. So you have, let's try this particular example, okay? So right here, let's write in all the beats that are obfuscated. Okay, so we have beat 2. We also have beat 3 is obfuscated. And then we have beat 4 that's obfuscated, right? You can clearly see that where I position these particular beats contradict the events that occur on the staff above it. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, right? But here, actually, let's write in all the spots that contradict. These two, this bottom staff is the time segment, is the actual pulse that's consistent. This top staff is the syncopated line, or which varies in terms of syncopation at any given moment. So right here, there's no syncopation, they're perfectly aligned. Right here, though, there's an obfuscation, right? So the beat that's obfuscated is beat 4, right? And then right here, there's syncopation. So the beat that's obfuscated is beat 2, right? And then the beat that's obfuscated here is beat 3, right? And what we have here is well, this beat is kind of obvious. Well, the event is held over, so it's not really syncopated, but it's still obfuscated because you're expecting something to happen here, but it's not happening here, right? Actually, it's very similar to these, in fact, right? There's something not happening here. So by having something not happen on the big beats, you're kind of experiencing a syncopation of sorts, especially when something occurred not on a big beat preceding that event, right? So not syncopated here because these two are aligned, whereas right here, there's syncopation because there's an event that you're expecting to happen here, but even though there's an event that you're expecting to happen here, it's actually held over from a previous beat, right? So we've bracketed all of the big beats, right? That are not happening. So keep those in mind. So in fact, whisper all of these notes, okay? Whisper all of these beats, I should say, to help you stay on track, right? Otherwise, it gives you a frame of reference on which to stand, okay? So here, I guess this is 1 and, right? I like the disambiguation of brackets. Okay, so then 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, okay? So the brackets represent the beats that are actually obfuscated, but feel those beats, right? Still feel those beats. So you can whisper them. So let's do this. I'll give you 4 beats for nothing, and then we'll start. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1. Ooh, I found another one that I forgot about. This one is also obfuscated. Okay, let's do this one more time. In fact, let me actually put in the beats here as well. So what would we have here? This is beat 1. What do we have here?
2.
2.
3.
3.
And.
Okay, let me 3 and, right? Gosh, these numbers are getting precarious. Then we have an and here as well. Okay. And then here, this is also an and, right? Sorry, this is totally messed up. And then right here, we have another and, right? And then we have another and here. What is this beat?
Four.
4. And, right? And then what's here?
And. 2 and.
2 and.
And 4.
And 4. Okay. Okay, right? So let's try this out, okay? Okay, so let's actually try to say this one, okay? Whisper the beats that are inactive, the big beats that are inactive. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So it's actually quite, I think I would argue that it's quite easy when we've actually bracketed and broken everything down in the way that we've done, because then we're actually very aware of everything that's happening, because you don't even have to look at the notes. In fact, when I was doing this, I was literally just reading what we wrote. But in your mind, it's helpful to start processing information like this in the manner that we've described. We've explicitly come up with how to write it. But in your mind, if you see things that are going off the beats, think about where the beats are in relation, right? Look at the beats and think about where they stray, right? So let's try this one more time. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3. Oh, I messed up. I'm sorry. 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Okay? In some ways, this is actually confusing me now. I'm so used to just doing this mentally, using mental math, but be explicit, think about it, practice it. What I think I'm going to do for a future performance quiz is to have you articulate or sing an exercise that's highly syncopated with the beat positions and possibly without. So anyway, let's try this one, okay? This time, let's not actually write out the beat positions. Let's just actually think about it based on what we see here, right? So here we have basically 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, right? We're obfuscating beats 2, 3, and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, right? So this is very common in pop music, right? People often poo-poo pop music. They say, oh, it's not complicated enough. Well, actually, pop music is very complicated from a syncopation standpoint. Like you can have something like. I'm basically playing off the beats, right? Or what about Frozen? Or isn't there something that goes like this in Frozen? Gosh, I can't remember. Let me actually pull it up. I think in Let It Go, I'm definitely going to get a copyright strike for this on my video. But anyway. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so if we have these particular sheet music, we just need like the first page to see an example of syncopation, right? So let's take a look right here, right? You can see, if I open this in a new tab, let's see if we can spot the syncopation, okay? We're gonna measure a 4-4. I guess I'll ask you the question, syncopated or not syncopated? You could say sync or not. These first 3 notes are syncopated or not? No, right? How about this beat right here? How about this note right here?
No.
This is actually syncopated. Well, this event is a syncopated event, right? Because you're actually, the result of this event occurring here is that you're obfuscating the beat that's happening here, right? So this is syncopated. And then this is also syncopated because this is, so like for instance, if I brought this in to our handy dandy one note, let it go. And if I actually, if I wrote this out and I actually drew this, this would be 1 and 2 and then here I'm actually obfuscating beat 3. Gosh, sorry, I'm doing this with my computer mouse. And then this is happening on and then I'm obfuscating 4, right? And then there's and, right? I'm putting that in a regular parentheses to show it's not as significant, right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and, right? So there's this syncopation right here. Right? So this particular beat is syncopated. This is very difficult. As someone who teaches piano to students, it's one of the difficulties people have when they finally start playing pop music is the rhythm. It's just very difficult to feel this. You actually when I say it da 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 ba-da, ba-da, da, 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 you probably latch on immediately. I think it's the conceptual idea of trying to parse all of this that's difficult. Like it makes sense once you feel it, right? Once you feel it, we're kind of parrots by nature. You just immediately feel the rhythm and it's nothing, right? But actually making sense of the rhythm is what's difficult, so that you can actually intuit what's going on, right? So you want to put yourself in a position where you're getting it right consistently. Because if you're not getting it right, you're not going to really remember it correctly, right? If you're practicing, it just makes common sense, right? If you're practicing something wrong, it's not going to internalize, right? So the whole framework for us being so explicit about which beats happen on the on beats and the off beats is based around this idea that it helps you realize where things happen in relation to the strong beats, so that you can kind of stay on track better and have a better chance of rendering the rhythm correctly. So looking forward, I think I'm going to add a section on the homework for next week, or for this week, I guess, the one you're going to get on Thursday, where I think in addition to the solfege, I'm going to make the melody highly syncopated and ask you to annotate the beats, and use brackets for big beats that are obfuscated and parentheses for smaller beats that are not obfuscated. I like that. That was an Alana tip. It's cool that Alana and Miguel are here. That's it makes me nervous. Now I'm like, oh gosh, there's TAs, but it's good. It's great. It's great. The more feedback, the better. And so it's great. So let's see. So that's a really cool tip though. So I'm going to add that onto the homework. And if anyone has any comments or anything, just feel free to speak up at any time, because sometimes my chat window is closed. So I'm glad I opened it to see that, with great delight to find out Miguel and Alana are here. So with that being said, there's a lot of syncopation in this particular song. And let's just, for instance, just if I open up this book that I have over here, the Ultimate Pop Rock Fake book, right? We'll just scroll through Benny and the Jets, okay? Look at that. There's syncopation right here, right? Because what's happening? We wrote 1, 2, oh, this is a hard one, right? 4 E and as a result of this event happening on the we're holding through beat 1 of the following measure, which is obfuscating the beat 1, which is creating a syncopation, right? So that's syncopated. Let's look ahead, or let's look behind. Bristol Stomp, Blue Suede Shoes. Okay, Blue Suede Shoes. I'm gonna move my cursor and tell me when you notice syncopation.
No.
Okay, very good. Okay, yeah, awesome. Okay, so there's syncopation right here. Wonderful. Okay, let's keep going. Nothing. Syncopation, right? Wow, my mouse got stuck there for some reason. I don't know why. All right, keep going. Syncopation, right? Syncopation. So we're obviously, as a result of this, we are, so syncopation. Now there's sometimes another useful thing to think about when we talk about syncopation is sometimes you can think about these syncopations as being anticipations or delays, okay? So right here, this is beat 3 that's being obfuscated, right? So the event that's causing the syncopation is actually this note is anticipating this beat, right? So that's causing a syncopation. I guess that's usually the case. I guess the inverse of that would be you can think about it like that if you don't have something on the previous beat, then you can kind of think about it as a delay instead of an anticipation. So for instance, if I have I'm kind of thinking out loud here without without fully thinking this through, so I might stub my toe on this. But if I have an example like this, we'll just create a syncopated example. In this particular example, I have basically beat 1, beat 2, and a 3, and a 4. So instead of thinking about this as an anticipation, it's almost like, well, you can think about this as a delay. It's like you basically almost, whoops, Sibelius won't like when I try to create events that are off the path. But you're basically creating, oh, whoops, that's wrong. Okay, and then you have basically beat 4, right? So in some ways, you're kind of delaying beat 3. It's like 1, 2, 3, and 4, and, right? This feels like a delay more than it feels like an anticipation, right? It's somewhat subjective though. Whereas over here, this feels like an anticipation to some degree. 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? Sorry, I did that wrong. 1 and 2 and 3, 4, right? It's like you're anticipating beat 3. 1 and 2 and 3, 4, okay? So anyway, hopefully this gives you a perspective on syncopation and rhythm. Spent a good deal of time on this, which is good. I do want to switch gears into talking about some harmonic stuff regarding cadences. And I foolishly made this, I also made an error on the homework, which I should have known that I made this error because I had this homework last year. I modified it for this year, but yet I still made an error, which should have caught this. So basically, if I go to homework 4, I open the PDF, and we're looking at this cadence section. When you write in the Roman numerals for this particular part, you will figure out what chords these are. So let's actually figure this out together, okay? So what key are we in right here? There's 2 flats, right? There are 2 flats. What is the major key associated with 2 flats? Well, two trips, B flat major, right? 2 trips along the circle of fifths, so B flat major. So if you see this chord right here, this is F major, right? So remember, we're connecting we're basically thinking about the root note of this chord in relation to this, in relation to the key that we're in, right? To figure out the Roman numeral, okay? So in this particular case, the root note is what? F, right? So F is the root note, and as a result of F being the root note, we're in the key of B flat major, which means that F is what scale degree in this key of B flat major?
Fifth.
The 5th, exactly. So it's the 5th. So we basically defined this chord as being the 5 chord. Remember, if we're actually thinking about bass notes versus root notes, we figured out the root note of this chord, and the root note defines the scale degree of the chord. So by figuring out that this F basically is the 5th note, by knowing that this chord is in root position, and basically taking the root and figuring out what scale degree it is, we know what Roman numeral to apply. So this is a 5 chord, a capital V, right? So let's look at this particular chord right here. This chord right here is in root position, right? It looks like a snowman. It looks like a snowman, and the bottom note of the chord is what note? What is the root note of this chord?
B flat.
B flat. And so we're B flat in the key of B flat major is what scale degree?
1.
It's 1, right? So we have a 5 chord going to a 1 chord. And by definition, when we think about cadence as a harmonic function, a 5 chord going to a 1 chord is basically called an authentic cadence. Okay? Similarly, a half cadence is a 1 chord going to a 5 chord. And a plagal cadence is a 4 chord going to a 1 chord. Now here, you're going to find a mistake in the homework, okay? So let's actually figure this out, okay? Not that this is the correct answer or anything. I mean, these are hypothetically answers to this question. Not that what I'm telling you is correct, but no, it actually is correct. I don't want to confuse you anymore. I'm actually literally giving you an answer right now, so pay attention. So basically, we're in the key of C major, right, for this particular exercise. Now, if we're in the key of C major, we have to construct Roman numeral analyses for all of these particular, for all these chords, right? Now, we've talked about the idea, I'll bring it up one more time, that to figure out a Roman numeral analysis, you basically have to figure out the bass note and the root note of the chord. And, well, I should say this, in order to figure out a Roman numeral analysis, to construct a Roman numeral analysis of a chord, you basically have to describe the chord in terms of the Roman numeral as well as the figured bass, right? So I guess I should say describing a chord for Roman numeral analysis, right? So in order to figure out the Roman numeral, we actually have to put the chord in root position, okay? So if it looks like a snowman, it's already in root position, okay? So for instance, we're in the key of C major, and this chord right here is already in root position. Now, since it's in root position, the bottom note of the chord is the root. And the bottom note of the chord is what note?
C.
C, right? So it's C. Now, yes, this is C. So what we're dealing with is basically what scale degree is C in the key of C major?
1.
So 1 chord, right? And then let's follow up on this and let's figure out what inversion we're dealing with, right? Now, okay. Let's see. Inversions, I'm just going to call it inversions and figured bass. And then we'll put this as assumed figured bass. Explicit, and we'll put this as, you know what, give me 1 second. Assumed figured bass. This is what people often assume. And this is explicit figured bass. This isn't like an official term or anything, but just to kind of explain to you why I've created 2 different ways of doing the same exact thing, right? So in one case it's assumed, the other case it's explicit, right? So remember that if we're looking at the chord that we were looking at here, you can just intervallically see, just by looking at the intervals, what Roman numeral, what figured bass we have to apply, right? We have to think about the outside interval as being what? What is the outside interval? Basically the distance between the bottom note and the top note.
6, right?
It's a fifth.
5.
5.
So then we have a fifth here, and then what about the interval between the bottom note and the middle note?
A third.
A third, okay. So when you have a 5-3 configuration, that is root position. And you can explicitly write 5-3, but it's assumed to already be 5-3, right? It's assumed to be 5-3 because the default intervals that you are working with are assumed to be fifths and thirds, right? So that's why you could write it in 2 ways. You could explicitly write 5-3, 1-5-3, Roman numeral 1, Arabic numerals 5-3, or you could just write 1, okay? So let's go on to the penultimate chord, okay? So we've got this E, G, C, okay? An E, G, and a C. Now here is, let's actually figure out what chord this is, okay? So in order to figure out this chord, I guess I can create a page. Example. So I've got an E, G, and a C. E, G, C in key of C major, right? So what we have to do is we have to rearrange these particular notes to put it in root position. Now there's a couple of things, there's a couple of ways to do this, okay? One of the ways we can do this is just by taking all the notes of the chord. Say we have this, okay? Let's say we have, dealing with this, right? So one of the ways we can do it is we can just basically flip the chord until we get to where we need to arrive at, right? And by doing so, we flipped it twice, and then we can kind of see that, oh, we had to flip this twice in this direction, right? And you got to root position, right? Because now it looks like a snowman. And then what you can do, remember we talked about this idea of basically comparing, in order to figure out the inversion of the chord, there's two ways you can figure out the inversion. So you know what, before I go on, there's two activities to consider here. We need to calculate the scale degree, we need to calculate the root of the chord for the Roman numeral, and then we need to calculate the inversion of the chord using the bass note for the Arabic numerals, okay? So we've already calculated the root of the chord for the Roman numeral, right? We're in the key of C major, and we flipped this, and we figured out that the root note is this note right here, right? So that is the root of the chord, it's C. So the note C in the key of C major happens to be, the one chord, right? It happens to be C. So this happens to be a one chord right here, right? We know that. But now we have to figure out the Roman numerals. Sorry, we have to figure out the Arabic numerals. Now, figuring out the Arabic numerals, you can complete using two ways. You can either use figured bass to help you, or use bass note to help you. I would say that the more versatile way is the first method, okay? Or I guess there's another, well, let me actually tell you something else. Flip chord into correct position. Look for fourth in chord. Anyway. Okay, so if we're calculating the inversion of the, I haven't explained what this is yet, but if we're calculating the inversion of the chord using Arabic numerals and we're using bass notes to help us, well, what we can do is we flipped the chord, right? We flipped it into root position. What we can do is we can basically evaluate the bass note of the chord that we're trying to analyze and see where it fits within the root position version of that chord. And you can see that this particular note E fits into the second note of the root position version of that chord, okay? Which means that this chord is actually in first inversion, okay? Does that make sense? And remember, if you want to write this as Roman numerals, basically what you would have to write in first inversion is you could write something like this, 6, whoops. Things going wrong here. 6, 3. If you want it to be explicit, right? Because the outside interval is a sixth and the inside interval is a third, right? So you could say 6, 3. Now you might wonder, well, why did I have to do all that work just now when I could have just started by doing this in the first place, right? Here's the shortcut way of doing this. Let's say I'm given a brand new chord. Let's say I'm going to give you this chord. The shortcuts don't always work. That's why I'm warning you about this. So we're still in the key of C major, right? Here's a shortcut. I'm going to put the shortcuts in green or in italics, okay? So the shortcut for finding the root of this chord is whenever you have an inverted triad, you'll see in closed position, you will see a fourth in the chord. What happens to be that the top of the fourth is actually the root of the chord. And I can prove that to you. Right? Because if I flip this, the top of the fourth is F, right? That means F is the root of this chord. If I flip this again, I flipped it, yet F is still the top of the fourth, right? So F is still the root of the chord. Now, if I flip this again, we're no longer seeing any fourths, we're seeing stacked thirds. And if we see stacked thirds, basically, as you know by now, the bottom note of the snowman, basically the bottom of this stack of thirds is going to be the root, okay? So this is a quick and dirty shortcut, okay? So let's using the shortcut, we know the top of the fourth is F, and F in the key of C major is what? What Roman numeral do we have to apply here?
Major fourth.
Exactly. So capital V. Now let's figure out the inversion. Let's use the quick and dirty way. Let's just use figured bass from the get-go, not even thinking about it, what inversion we're in, okay? So what figured bass would I put here? What's the outside interval?
6.
6. And then what are we dealing with next?
3.
3, exactly, right? So you might think, well, that was much quicker than doing all this work, right? The reason that the long method is useful is because the short method is useful when everything's in closed position, okay? But when things become an open position, it's not so useful anymore. So what I mean by that, we haven't talked about open position chords yet too much, but if I basically, if I distribute the notes like this, if this is still EGC, this is EGC over here, and the bass note is going to be E, okay? Whereas here, this is ECG, the bass note is E, okay? And remember, the bass note is the note. The lowest note of the chord is what determines the inversion, okay? So now you're in a situation, you might think, well, what's the root of this chord? There's no fourth, so you're not like, what's the top of the fourth? There's no fourth here. So you can't like tell what the root is using the shortcut, right? So you actually have to manually do what we talked about. You have to actually put things in closed position, and then now you can actually use a shortcut if you want. You could see, I've taken this note down octave, now I see a chord in closed position. The top of the fourth is C, so the root of the chord is C, right? You can't like immediately just jump into the shortcut. But you could still do it the long way and flip this in your head and be like, okay, well, if I flip this, this is what I get, and as a result of flipping it, and I now know that C is the root note of this chord, you can do it the long way, right? But thinking about the inversion, right? If I'm in this situation, I can't just look at this and say, like, it would be incorrect for me to call it this. It would be incorrect for me to call this 1, 10, 6. My software won't even let me do it, right? You could say, oh, this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is a 10th on the outside interval, and a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the inside interval. That'd be incorrect. My software won't even let me do that. It's not correct. So remember, when you're dealing with figured base, it's assuming that you're in closed position. It's basically writing, yeah, it's assuming that you're in closed position. And the information that you write out is meant to describe the chord as if it were in closed position. So you actually have to bring the chord in closed position, and then you can now analyze it using the shortcut of saying, oh, outside interval is a sixth, inside interval is a third, right? But remember, the long way would just be to continue flipping it and figuring out where basically this note of the chord, the bass note of the chord, fits into the root position version of that chord. That's the long way of doing it, right? Those are two ways, equivalent ways of getting to the same truth. Anyway, hopefully that makes sense. I think we're over time now, so I will stop, but I'll stick around if there are any questions, and hopefully that's clear. Cool. Any questions, anyone? I know I have to respond to some of your emails. It's been a super hectic week. I'm just so exhausted right now. I'm looking forward to taking a nap, but I will get back. Someone wants to schedule office hours outside of class. If that person is here, I will schedule with you. And then someone, oh, what part exactly was the mistake in the homework? The part in the homework that's the mistake. Ah, I didn't talk about that. My mistake. I didn't talk about the mistake. The part in the homework that's the mistake is this. So right here, you have basically a 1 chord, right? You have a 1 chord. I got sidetracked. This is basically a 1 chord. And then right here, what you have, remember, if you look at the top of the fourth, it's an F. And the F means that this chord is the F is the root of the chord. So here, the C is the top of the fourth. So C in the key of C major is 1. So this is a 1 chord. Here, the top of the fourth is F. And F is the top of the fourth, which means that F is the root of the chord, which means F is the 4th scale degree when compared to C major. So we're going from a 1 chord to a 4 chord. Now that right there is actually not one of the cadences that exists, or at least that's common. The type of cadence that we're expecting for a plagal cadence is 4 going to a 1 chord. I guess you can consider that like a half plagal cadence, but that isn't really a thing, right? It could be a thing, but it's not. It's, in other words, this cadence is nothing. And I made this mistake last year. I just forgot to change it. So apologies. This cadence is something, but this cadence right here is nothing. There's no such thing as, no name for a 1 chord going to a 4 chord.
Oh, wait, so Professor, there's no cadence measure 5. You know, it says, because it's like a 1, 2, 1.
Oh my gosh, sorry. There. That I did. Yeah, this is also this is. Well, I've introduced an additional error from the previous year in my formatting. So yes, there's no cadence going from here to here. So I totally convoluted the idea of cadence for you guys this week. So I apologize for that. Truth be told, we didn't talk about cadence as much. And there's only 2 sections. Yeah, there's 3 cadences, but yeah, I have to tell the TAs, this is incorrect. I just made mistakes here. So apologies for that. Yeah, there's no cadence here. You'd have to find, I guess you could make it an activity for circling the cadences that you find. If you find a 1 chord going to a 5 chord, this, you know, I bet you this is supposed to go here. When I reformatted it, I basically made all the notes bigger so that students could see it. Last year, for the first 2 quarters, the notes were smaller than this, and students, it wasn't until a student like voiced that they wished the notes were bigger, like 3rd quarter, that I went back and did it and remade the notes bigger. So it's always important that you voice your concerns to me, and I'll try to adjust. But anyway, as a result of reformatting this line got moved, and it should have been here. So apologies for that. But you won't be docked. I guess like everyone will kind of get free points for this section just by the virtue of the fact that there are more incorrect things that are written here than things that you're expected to get correct. So how could I expect you to understand the concepts? So anyway, you'll continue to see questions like this on future homeworks, and I'll make sure that they are correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions? Oh, no. Is my microphone still doing a strange reverby effect currently? Anyone know? Anyone, William, Daniel, Valen? Do you know if my microphone is doing a strange effect?